As you can see, there are quite many chairs necessary on this side of the table. It was a very intense, it were very tense couple of days, 3 days full of discoveries, I think, for each of us. Behind the table are sitting Slovene poets, Japanese poets and translators who helped with the mediation of the texts. And perhaps before I begin with just an explanation what was going on in these 3 days, I'd like to present all of us just with brief comments. On my left, Nagisa Moritoki, who some of you may know, professor at the University in Ljubljana, Faculty of Arts in Ljubljana, and a translator from Slovenian into Japanese as well. Nagisa was extremely helpful in organizing basically a big amount of work which was done before the arrival of the poets here. All texts of all poets have been translated in both directions, and that was really a big amount of work, but absolutely necessary in order to have, I mean, normal ground for our work here. Katja Perat, Slovenian poet. Misumi, Japanese poet. I have to say, all of the Japanese poets will present themselves on the readings here within the festival, and you will be able to follow the results of this workshop while reading the Slovenian translations of them.
Sorry, Aleš. Mizuki is, of course, Japanese poetess.
Poetess.
You can see.
You can see. Kiwao Nomura, I have here a book of his that was selected as the best translation of the year into American last year. We had a great chance to see one of the movies of Kenji Fukuma, which will be repeated on Friday at I guess midnight at the main place where the main activities are taking place at Vrazov Trg. Experimental film, with a very rare, how should I say, combination of poetry and visual material. A beautiful film, and all of us who have seen it were really amazed with it, and you're all invited to come to watch it. It's with English subtitles, but of course you have to be also at his reading. Keijiro Suga, a poet who is traveling from here further to Belgrade to attend another meeting there. Then Milan Dekleva, Slovenian poet, Ryouichi Wago, poet who touched us deeply with his work on the Fukushima disaster. He comes from Fukushima, and you'll be able to listen to Keijiro Suga and him tonight. Gašper Bivšek, Slovene poet, and then Katya, Šifkovič and Gordana Tomažin, who worked very intensely with us as translators. Now, there is perhaps nothing that we could invent that hasn't been done already in terms of the methods implemented in a translations workshop. We tried our best in selecting very carefully all the poets participating, choosing poets from different generations, leading voices of their generation. We asked each poet to select 10 poems of his own and 10 poems of other poets out of their language, usually poems out of traditional poems that have had a deep impact on their poetics. And then rough translations, word-by-word translations have been done before the meeting by students in both directions. And then through a very intensive dialogue, I think these translations have been revised, have been rewritten, have been turned upside down. English translations helped a bit as well, although it proved quite many times that very often when we think, oh, that's a great translation, it's not completely reliable. So you have to re-ask and rethink each word, each phrase again. Before I pass the floor to all the poets here involved and the translators and you to pose questions, perhaps I would like just to stress out that similar workshops have been already performed in the last years with Chinese and Turkish poets with great success. A small anthology of Slovenian poetry was just published in China, and our big wish is, of course, that this workshop with the same people would be repeated next year in Japan. Now, this workshop couldn't happen without the support of the EU-Japan Fest, a foundation which really encourages cultural exchange between Japan and EU. And what concerns poetry, it's really necessary. We know quite a lot about the traditions and the contemporary situation of most of European literatures. We know quite a lot about what's going on in the States, in Australia, even in India perhaps. But there are very little, historically seen, there are very, very little information about Japanese 20th century and 21st century poetry in Slovene. There are very little translation, and there is really a lack of communication. And I see this project as a first bridge to overcome this really big cultural gap and to create a deeper understanding for each other's work. Now, perhaps I would like, as the first, to ask Milan Dekleva, because he's the one of the hosts and he is the oldest of the hosts, if I may say, to tell perhaps a couple of words about his experience. Milan is an extremely experienced translator from Italian, from English. Any other languages? He just finished a superb translation of Montale, and of course, as with all of us, none of the poets, Slovenian poets here speaks Japanese. I guess it was a big adventure, but perhaps you can tell much more about this process.
Aleš, would you be so kind to translate my few words, because I would like to speak in Slovenian language. It was a huge battle. It was a huge battle with time, you know, this work, because working on translation of poetry is like I don't know, like like making diamonds, or I don't know, really precise word. Posebna poezija japonskih kolegov. Ta poezija namreč govori kar naprej, skozi aluzije, to se pravi, ne govori direktno.
The special poetry, a special case is the poetry of the Japanese friends, because it's a kind of poetry which doesn't speak directly, it speaks through allusions.
Kadar pa govori direktno, kot naprimer kolega, ki opisuje tragedijo v Fukushimi.
But when it does speak directly, as in case of Mr. Wago, who speaks explicitly about the tragedy in Fukushima,
išče simboliko, ki bi pojasnila vzroke za to tragedijo, išče univerzalno resnico, ki stoji za tragedijo, ki se je zgodila vsem, kajti tragedija Fukushime je tragedija nas vseh.
It seeks to find a symbolic truth, a general truth, which would somehow, not explain, but tell the tragedy that happened to all of us, not only to the people of Fukushima.
Yeah, and this is what connects us, this universal... because of universalism of poetry, we can translate it such different things. So, lahko rečem samo to, da vseh 5 pesnikov po mojem v nogometnem žargonu prva liga.
All I can say is that all 5 poets belong to the first class, first in football terms, to the first league of world poetry.
World poetry, yes. Voilà.
Anyone from the Japanese side, perhaps?
Oh, this is my first experience in such a cultural exchange. Before I came here, I had some doubt about such this occasion. Who can be the representative of his country, his culture, his society? So I have some doubt about even this occasion. But from the first day of the workshop, I was very, very much moved by Slovenian poets who, to my surprise, who read my poetry very, very honestly. So I thought, I was wondering if I had such experience since I started to write poetry in Japan. So, in such from the first encounter, I continued to be moved and deeply moved with Slovenian poets and Slovenian translators' efforts, very, very much. And what is most what has surprised me in another point is beyond the aim Aleš explained about before, beyond that, we can make contact in the very essence of poetry. So I feel now very happy to have such experience with being poets, and they read our poems seriously, and also they saw my film. Very happy now.
Perhaps let's talk a bit about the actual detailed experience in trying to translate from languages such different as Japanese and Slovenian are. My personal experience was that I was shocked by the fact that in the poetics of all of you, I could see a completely freely move from descriptions or descriptions of narrative situations which do exist in reality, to those which are happening only in one's head, in one's imagination, in one's psychic region.